It was such a good feeling when you're out there, you know, the way we used to live long ago with nobody around, just enjoying the environment, enjoying the land. A lot of trappers like myself that had traps out, they got run over, you know, and your livelihood depended on the trap itself and maybe the fur that's going to be caught in it. So.
Open ngami ya milununa umayo ukya kami ukyu milununa hinikto iya 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 iya
Where we are, we're rich in food-wise, like from the land. We could go out there and go jiggle in a creek to get fresh fish, to bring it home and eat. And we could go up on the hills up here, and you could hunt caribou up here. And you could go down about 3 hours drive to the ocean. There's where there's people go whaling.
Prior to government involvement, you know, very traditional lifestyle. Everyone harvested for their living and harvest for food and you know, to make some income from the fur industry.
For centuries, life changed very little on the northern edge of the world. The Inuvialuit of the Western Arctic were survivors. Living nomadic lives, they followed the animals and the changing of the seasons to hunt wildlife and provide for their families. There were no watches and no clocks in this part of the world, only seasons. After long and cold winters, the sun begins to return to the skyline. Winter warms into beautiful summers in the Arctic. The melting and breaking of the ice gives life to the sea creatures that lay mostly hidden for much of the year. The nomadic Inuvialuit will begin what would have been a very busy harvesting season.
At that time we were living in as a nomadic people, and we were living out on the land, out in the sea, and that's how we were making our living.
Harvesting of the beluga and the bowhead whales is a staple in the traditional Inuvialuit diet.
During those years, it was never like, to me, we were, even though we didn't have much, we were happy, we were well off. I think they were more satisfied with whatever they had. And they shared a lot, you know, they shared whatever they felt they needed to give. And people were really ready to prepare their country food, cut it up and bring it, pass it around.
The old days, we don't have those conveniences at home, but we were happy. There was no worries. There was no bills to pay. You could go anywhere and be at home. You could travel 30 miles out of the main community and still feel at home. And you don't worry about getting kicked out of your rental house. Wherever you go, it's your own. So we had our own dog team. Dog team don't break down, you know, they don't run out of gas.
Short summers can seem a little longer in the 24-hour daylight of the Arctic. Even as the sun begins to dip below the horizon again and the summer becomes fall, the hard work of harvesting does not rest throughout the winter.
Long ago, they prepared for the winter. Not like today, we could go to the store and just get whatever one. Long ago, they had to get everything ready for the winter.
When I go out, like for instance in the middle of October, just before freeze up, to do some hunting for my dogs before trapping season starts, so that I don't have to haul food around. I just catch them, hunt seals, bring them in the beach, catch them wherever I'm going to be camping, you know, different nights, traveling with dogs.
harvesting everything from the caribou, fox, muskox, and whales, to ice fishing with baleen-made fish nets. The traditional Inuvialuit nomadic life of hunting and fishing, followed by preparation and preservation of food, was a very busy and hard-working lifestyle. This life also required many different skill sets.
You know, they must be pretty smart. They must be scientists. There must be geologists. I mean, not geologists, but maybe people that do research on wildlife, and so they must do a lot of studies in their own way. And so that's how come, you know, they could be able to hunt seal, and you know, they could look for animals that even though they can't see them, they could get them through other means of finding them, such as sniffing dog, and also looking for a seal hole in terms of where there's some little bit of rough ice, and you know, they develop a technique that nowhere else in the world had been used, such as an igloo. And to top it off, it's a fireproof.
Along with a great sense of humor and dedication to life, the Inuvialuit land, too, is full of riches. The potential natural resources in the Arctic are seemingly endless, and this was and is attractive to people other than the Inuvialuit. In just a few years, the Inuvialuit way of life would be turned upside down, never to be the same again. With the explosion of the whaling industry in the region, the landscape evolved largely, with people hunting less for food and more for trading. Settlements were established to trade goods and service. This new industry and the Inuvialuit were evolving from nomadic harvesters to be more reliant on the industries of trade.
At that time, but probably a couple of years earlier than that, I came here to do hunting seals, and because at that time they used to do a lot of hunt seals, and I was supposed to go back by next year.
At the turn of the century, the whaling industry was beginning to collapse. After a few long years of foreign sailors decimating the whale population for whale baleen and introducing new diseases to the newly settled Inuvialuit communities, the industry was dying out. The Inuvialuit would continue earning a living with hunting to trade furs. For many years, white fox was one of the region's biggest exports. As late as the 1950s, many Inuvialuit were still living their nomadic lifestyle. The government, at different levels, wanted to have more influence and control in the Arctic, and as such, built the so-called Arctic Model Community of Inuvik by trying to move the residents of Aklavik across the Mackenzie Delta to the newly constructed town site.
At the time, it were pacing in a fast pace, like from out on the land. Then a lot of people used to be out on the land. Then we all moved in.
For years now, the Inuvialuit have experienced outside and foreign pressure to immerse themselves in a new culture and way of life. It was one thing to be forced to adapt to these new lifestyles. It was another to be completely ignored and pushed aside.
If you look after the land in turn will always give you something back. So.
You know, the oil and gas industry was there. When government was making decisions, certain areas were being alienated, which said that those lands are now, or those resources are pledged to a oil and gas company.
They were worried about what would happen if the oil companies came. What would happen with the animals? For instance, our caribou. Our caribou is our main food here. We're not like in the down south where you could just go to the store and buy whatever you want.
When we were nomadic people, there was hardly any communications. There wasn't very much. And the only thing that we could be able to hear on radio was the AM radio on Skip, like Edmonton or Dawson City or somewhere like that. In other national news, the Trans-Canada Highway. Later on, when we came here and moved here, that we became aware that there are things that are happening in our world.
And at the time, there was a lot of oil and gas activity going on. Imperial Oil were given rights to drill for oil in any valued land in this area here, in Tuck HTC area. And you're traveling on a trap line. You start, and starting in November, middle of November, you start seeing rigs coming, roads being built and rigs being put up, and you see all this going up right in front of you, basically. And that got me concerned because they were impacting on, on a lot of trappers like myself.
As far as development taking place, well, there was no regard to who owned the land, what kind of concerns we had over wildlife. They were, I recall a seismic program that was taking place in Sachs Harbor, that the seismic wires that they were using for geophones and stuff like that were entangled in the horns of the caribou. That's gone a little too far there. And there was blasting in the lakes and waters using dynamite, and that was destroying some of the habitat and the fish. So all those things were happening at a pace where it was too much.
When the mining started coming, we started seeing big planes coming in. They make a landing strip in Kings Bay, DC-6, DC-4s, DC-3s. All the big planes were coming in, and it was the Muskog mines and Grand Roy mines were starting up at that time, and I guess they would find a lot of interest just north of us here, and so they were starting to work, and we were wondering how come these people are coming in. So at that time we found out that there were mining companies. We had no voice, we never hear anything about them, and yet they did everything that they want. And then when they finished their work, well, probably they never quite finished, but when they quit, they had left everything out on the land in their camps, such as fuel oil, lube oil, a lot of old materials such as automobiles and stuff like that.
Government, the federal and territorial were ignoring, Nunavut. They weren't, they didn't see our participation. There was no room at their table for us to be part of that process.
Who's looking after my interest? And also who's looking after the other trappers that are being impacted the same way I was?
There was very little regard for the environment when they were out there and doing the actual work. I have first-hand experience in that, and that's been a pattern for a long, long time. Oil and gas people coming up here and doing whatever they wanted to do without the involvement of the local people or the Nunavut in my case.
It was just really an erosion over time of people being bypassed and not being dealt with, not having input on what were the proper programs, what would work for the Inuvialuit and what wouldn't work.
The Inuvialuit had been living on these lands and providing for their families in this region for centuries. With the government and private sector, interest now focused on their lands. The Inuvialuit had begun to feel the effects.
Oil and gas went ahead in this region. Of course, it provided employment and stuff like that, but it didn't provide the involvement of the people that lived here. It lacked that. That part was missing.
By the 1960s, residents all across the Arctic were beginning to feel the need to have an increased role and to have an actual voice when it came to issues involving their people and the land they call home.
The thing that they really want is just protecting the land, not to give up the land. The land is ours. Money is nothing. The money, we'll have it for a little while, but it'll be gone.
By the early 70s, the pressures had been felt in every community, and people were reaching their limits and wanted a united voice to speak on their behalf. In a small meeting in Inuvik on January 28, 1970, 19 people voted to form the Committee of Original Peoples Entitlement. There were many issues in the region that the new committee would have to focus its attention on. Industry was booming, and the biggest side effects to the local communities were not the wealth the projects were creating, but the effects on wildlife, land, and the social problems being left behind.
These people are talking about the wildlife, they're talking about people's rights, they're talking about the Inuvialuit people in the area, and they were talking about government, they were talking about oil and gas people, they were talking about just pretty well everything that people needed to, to deal with.
So we had to work fast because things were happening. We didn't have, say, 20, 30, or 40 years because there would be nothing left to get economic benefits for Inuvialuit. So we had to be sure that we did our job as quickly as possible, but in a favorable way for people to have an understanding.
The 19 founding members of the Committee for Original Peoples Entitlement had their work cut out for them, work that would span over great territorial distances to all of the remote communities.
We had to rely on people who were totally dedicated and wanting to do it, and seeing a need for the Aboriginal face to be recognized, whether it's treaty or whether it was Inuit in the Eastern Arctic or whether it was Métis. People were, I think, becoming very political about, just how strong a voice they had.
The ideals for COPE were being formed, but the message needed support.
How do we get involvement of the people in the community and elsewhere? What approach do we take? How do we get our messages across that, there are people that wants to, go in a way where things that they're living with can be improved.
The crew from the COPE was traveling to the communities, and Sam Raddy, Mark Nuxan, and I believe it was Peter Green that came into my house, and they were talking to me about the land claim, what was happening. So, and I started asking questions, and later on, towards the end of the day, the interview with me, they asked me if I was interested in working with them.
We were building a claim, and we had to be sure that we reached every family and as broad an age group as we could.
When they asked me to be a negotiator, I decided to take advantage of that. And I went with the attitude that if I, as a hunter and a trapper, with all the industrial activity going on in a wage economy, that if I could live with an agreement, that will satisfy me in preserving the environment and the wildlife, I took the attitude that if I could live with an agreement, they probably could live with it too.
There was a lot of public meetings, and there was a lot of radio programs on it, But from the beginning, we knew that in order to get the understanding and the input that we required, because in the end we had to vote on an end product. And it was not fair for people not to know enough to be able to vote in an educated way about something that affects their lives forever.
Okay, this is the last settlement, okay?
The message of COPE was being heard, and a large majority of the Inuvialuit, through voting, supported the actions and priorities that the workers of COPE represented. But the negotiations would need more than just unified local support.
The Yukon government was running campaigns against COPE, and the territorial government certainly was not in support of a claim. You know, the treaty people were not in support of us a claim because they didn't want us to set a precedent in case they wanted to do more with their treaty rights. And the federal government wasn't a real friend of ours either, so.
To put the entire Yukon coastline under the control of COPE in respect to future development. We remain adamantly opposed to it, and by we, I mean Yukoners, both native and non-native.
I think, you know, sometimes when you're trying to make a change, when you're trying to bring change, to present change, you come into conflict sometimes. You know, your own ideas or their people's ideas. You know, you've got to come to a agreement somewhere.
We started off with the land use and occupancy study as a basis to move the claim forward to the whole process, the question of land claims, the question of land rights, the question of ownership, the question of everything.
You know, how the environment is, how the land is going to be used, how we're going to have safety net for areas of Inuvialuit history, the land hunting areas.
COPE employed field workers in each community in the region to go to each house to explain the work COPE was trying to accomplish and to gather information about land use and community needs and expectations.
Whatever the office in Inuvik sent us, the news, we had to go house to house and explain it in our language to try to get them across what does the land claim about, why they're trying to get their land claim, and ask them questions. What is the place that you? What's up? Some places that where your cabin used to be. They went around with maps and everything. They just went to the elders and asked about how they lived long ago.
It was on the basis of land use that we moved forward.
The Inuvialuit worked on a proposal that would include the Eastern Arctic and what is now Nunavut. But after a few months, it became clear that the combined agreement would have some delays. Industry in the Western Arctic was full steam ahead, and a regionalized claim was needed to represent the Inuvialuit before it was too late.
The Inuit in the Eastern Arctic withdrew their proposal, and there was too many things happening here in the Western Arctic.
This was a land rights deal. It was basically a land rights deal, and when you're dealing with the land, you're dealing with the environment, you're dealing with the critical habitat areas of wildlife, you're dealing with the wildlife itself.
The next stage was to develop the agreement and the proposal. The proposal was called the Inuvialuit Nunangat. It was a document that was put together by all of the 6 Inuvialuit communities.
There were 3 areas around which this negotiation took place. One was land, the second was wildlife harvesting, and the third was participation in the institutions that are going to manage wildlife.
Inuvialuit, well, we didn't have an agreement yet, so we worked pretty hard We work practically some days, day and night, to get some work done.
Sometimes we'll go out for, you know, a week, sometimes for 2 weeks, sometimes at the most 3 months, you know, at one time in Ottawa. And at that time it was borrowed money, and you know, COPE was, you know, borrowing funds against the claim to negotiate the claim, so the wages weren't that you know, up to par.
To get that into the bureaucracy and into the mindset of the territories or provincial governments, it took a long time, so we had to fight our way all the way through. This is not an easy, was absolutely not easy for anyone.
When the negotiators went to Ottawa in those years, they stayed months at a time. It was fun for them, but at the same time it was really, especially in this time of the year, you know, when they're out hunting, everybody's out hunting at home, and they're down there negotiating, and you know, we have a lot to thank those people for, and a lot of them are not here anymore.
It's pretty hard to, you know, just leave a trap line and then go out on a trip. You don't know how long you're going to be out there. And then you come back, you know, and the next day you're out on land again. So I think that was the hardest part, was leaving, you know, the thing that you love doing.
You know, we had to show the government and say that, look at this here. This is where we have been hunting and we have been living there. This is what we want, and we're not going to come with less. And then if you're going to give us less, we're going to test our Aboriginal rights in court.
The government's attitude was they can look after all Native people. We don't need a claim. That we're going to blow it if we ever get any kind of monetary compensation, and we don't know nothing about corporations, land administration. So, I mean, that was a challenge. I mean, that alone just put a fire in your heart to prove them wrong.
So I don't think it's going to change anything, because it's everybody's looked after. It's just that the Inuvialuit themselves will have a little more say on their own land.
So we proceeded on that basis. We chose not to go to court to settle the question of Inuvialuit claim. We know that it was going to be a long, drawn-out process, many years, but you know, millions of dollars involved, which we didn't have.
The years after the formation of COPE from 1970 onward were very busy, not only in the region, but all over the north. Government had invited applicants for the Canadian Arctic gas pipeline proposal. Inuit Tapariksat of Canada was formed, written the claim, submitted it, and withdrew 4 months later. All the while, the concept of offshore drilling was approved. By 1978, COPE signed the Agreement in Principle with the federal government. This AIP set forth interim land and hunting provisions and advanced settlement payments.
You know, all of these different parts of IFA claim started to happen.
You know, although we have agreed to the principles itself, the government find a lot of excuses and saying that, you know, we can't do this and we can't do that. A lot of the time our negotiations break down until we come up with some compromises and stuff like that.
Issues began arising from the overlap of traditional land use between different Aboriginal groups. The new Conservative government refused to negotiate and had wanted to change provisions within the Agreement in Principle. COPE viewed these changes as a lack of credibility within the government. In 1982, Simon Reisman was appointed the new chief negotiator and promised a final agreement within 6 months.
That is the reason why it took so long, for 6 years before the final agreement from the Agreement in Principle, and because it was very difficult to negotiate all those things that we wanted.
On behalf of the people of Tuktoyaktuk and the Western Arctic region and our friends who have come here from areas right close to our region, that we are important. And it may be a frontier land, but we are important because we hold something very precious and dear.
Finally, after 14 long years of volunteer grassroots organization, community outreach, federal negotiations and loans from neighboring Aboriginal groups in the coastal community of Tuktoyaktuk, on June 5th, 1984, the Inuvialuit Final Agreement was signed.
So with all the people who took part, and I don't know how long we could mention everybody, because from the smallest people in Tuk and all the communities to the oldest people, we still have a lot of work to do. But in all the controversy and in all the ways that we try to resolve our differences and make things the way we feel we could move, I don't believe there is one person that did not participate.
You've really achieved something great for the North, and you've achieved something absolutely tremendous for all of Canada.
He was a mother of our culture at that time, because they were looking after everything so that we can be able to start making investments in terms of development that's taking place in our area, in Beaufort, and also on the land near Inuvik and Aklavik.
It came to the point where while I'm trapping out in the bush in the trap line, I could see a plane circling, following my trail, finding me, landing in a lake. I'm going to it. And you know, it was the office wanting me to go back to the office for so many days because they had somebody interested in talking to IDC chairman.
Included in the final agreement was a settlement amount of $152 million paid over the course of 5 years for the setup, administration, and future investments of the corporate group.
When IDC got this money, finally the door opened and the Inuvialuit were able to go out there and take part in what's going on. So just the opportunities was there.
You look at the kind of businesses that are run by Inuvialuit-owned businesses. We're doing very well, because it's not only the corporate group, but through the claim, the preferences that are given to Inuvialuit companies in our region gives them an opportunity to grow too.
With a regional corporation, there are different organizations that adhere to the varying sections of the final agreement. The Inuvialuit Game Council, in cooperation with the Community Hunters and Trappers Association, along with the Joint Secretariat Office, Wildlife Management Advisory Council, partner with other government organizations to monitor, assess, and protect the wildlife, lands, and waters within the Inuvialuit settlement region. Through the Development Corporation, investments have been made in many companies that operate in and out of the settlement region.
Some things are valuable and they make money, and these are also services that people require, you know, airline services that people required, shipping services that people use. So these are things that it made sense for the corporate group to get involved with because it was services to Inuvialuit.
The corporate group became shareholders in businesses such as Canadian North, the airline company that serves 37 communities throughout the North, and NTCL, or Northern Transportation Company Limited, which has delivered goods to remote communities in the North since the 1950s. 2009 was also the 75th anniversary of the much relied on company. Other business investments have been made in other industries in the ISR, such as energy, construction, and service. While the corporation now has an estimated value of nearly $400 million, it isn't always about bottom lines. There are many community organizations and programs that get their funding through the regional corporation, or the IRC would help organize government funding.
The claim is not only about the economics, but the social well-being of the Inuvialuit.
It's beneficial because we need to develop capacity in our region. we need to develop economic opportunities, and we need to help people with addictions, wellness issues, family wellness issues, preventative health issues. So they're able to respond, and they're able to participate with the goals of the Inuvialuit Final Agreement.
One such program is run through the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. The program offers support services and runs workshops to help community members deal with mental health issues and issues faced by former residential school students.
General focus is try to help the elders to be stronger, feeling better about themselves, equipping them with tools that we need to be a better service to their communities, to the people in their communities.
And I wanted to show you this because I don't know how to express it on something like that. All my hurt, all my hate, I kept it to myself. I couldn't find the strength to get rid of it. But now, through this workshop, I know how to deal with it.
We are progressing, that our funding is geared towards Inuvialuit, so it feels really good to see people succeed.
The Community Development Division also has individuals available to help facilitate local economic opportunities in each of the communities in the ISR. One such program is the muskox harvest in Sax Harbour.
Self-sustaining economic opportunity for the community. So Sax Harbour has a lot of muskox. Let's do something with the muskox in Sax Harbour. You know, it's the largest herd in the Northwest Territories in Canada. Let's do something with that. So we're just looking at each community and working with government, partnering with government to see how we could respond to each community.
Another department in the corporate group is the Inuvialuit Education Fund. IEF provides funding for beneficiaries looking to further their education and careers.
You have to meet criteria. You have to be in a diploma or a degree program, have a 70% or better average in your last academic year. And if you're from the Northwest Territories, you receive an extra $500 a month. If you're not from the Northwest Territories, but you are an Inuvialuit beneficiary, you can receive an extra $200 a month. We also have 20 scholarships that range from $1,000 to $5,000.
IEF also partners with other departments within the corporate group and outside federal agencies and companies to organize career fairs in each of the communities to showcase education and career options to Inuvialuit youth.
I do visits to communities in the springtime, February, March, April, and I help them fill out all applications for student financial assistance for college, university, and for IEF.
Well, my job is as a police officer, I can do all kinds of different things.
We want beneficiaries to be educated and to be a part of the NWT or Canadian provinces, working at the same level, receiving same benefits, same salary.
It's so important for people to have a good education, so in turn they can run. Like Inuvialuit should be getting the education that's required. And it's got to be a good education, because we're handling the future of the Inuvialuit, the investments of the Inuvialuit.
You get one.
June 5th, 2009 was the 25th anniversary of the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, the deal that has shaped, provided for, and protected the Western Arctic, the people, and the land. Each community was afforded an opportunity to hold their own celebrations over the course of the summer to commemorate the historic accomplishment.
On reflection of the negotiations, you know, there are so many people that participated, and so many people who are interested to participate and be interviewed, and also to give us the direction, their thoughts on what should be in a land claim agreement. Much of what's in the Invalid Final Agreement are things that were important and reflections that they had for the future of people.
The people in our communities could look after the land the way that they wanted. Oil companies just can't go out here and just drill whenever they want to. They have to go through a climate committee corporation and hunters and trappers.
2, 3,
Holy smokes, Eddie, I didn't know you had tonsils.
So the claim was settled 25 years ago, but that doesn't mean that it was a book to put on the shelf, but it was a final agreement for everyone to continue to use, continue to utilize, and continue to refer to, particular if you feel your voices are not heard.
Now I see all kinds of progress that was being made and being implemented and being done that I never saw in the early years of my time.
Which one is equaler? These are Siglix, the diamond, and then
The creation of cotton. It's an art. Mastered over a couple of minutes. Do it for hours?
When I think about it, I really appreciate that, we have organizations such as COPE and at that time, and nowadays that we have IRC and Game Council and all the other organizations that help us to manage our land and our wildlife.
Today I feel pretty good being part of the IFA process. Feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
It's,
sure.
it's something that I see, we're over 3,000 strong as Inuvialuit, that we've made history in many areas. Our business groups, business organizations that we've had with IRC, IDC, we're on the map.
It was a great day and great feeling for me to know that we finally had it. We have the agreement, final agreement that they could protect the interest of all the Inuvialuit, right from harvesters all the way to business opportunities, training programs, and that for the youth that were starting to develop and and seeking respectable jobs within the organizations that were being set up.